Welcome again, everybody. Welcome to Kentucky Term Limits, and my name is Aaron Duquette. I am your State Director for U.S. Term Limits in Kentucky. We're joined again by another U.S. Term Limits pledge signer. Chris Kleymeyer is a candidate running for the state legislature here in Kentucky, and he has been among many who have signed our pledge of support for our congressional term limits resolution in order to put term limits on Congress. And so, Chris, do you want to maybe introduce yourself a bit and tell us a little bit about why you support term limits on Congress?
All right. Aaron, thank you. I live in Kentucky, over in the 58th District, which is mainly Shelby County, Kentucky. Lived here for the last 15, 16 years since I retired from the Army down at Fort Knox, Kentucky. I was a career Army officer, retired and went to work in state government. Did 15 years in the Kentucky Department of Correction, was their training director and then their operations director. So that's about 40, 45 years of combined federal and state service. Have dealt with Congress, mainly congressional staffers, an awful lot. Did a couple tours at the Pentagon. So I've had some experience dealing with our legislators and their staffs on a very personal basis. Based upon that, and after reading Scott Murphy's book, I really do think term limits is the absolute right decision for the country. And to me, it's numbers. Army officer, we're taught to be analytical. And if you look at the numbers, there's approximately 330 million Americans in the continental United States today. In our 244-year history of the country, we've only had 1,307 senators and 10,363 representatives. Now we get them 100 senators at a time, and currently we get 435 sitting representatives. But if you look at those numbers and you just do a real simple mathematical calculation, we've approximately in the last 244 years have only really had the equivalent of 13 new Senates and 23 new Houses in the last 244 years.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of wealth of experience and diversity and opinions when you have a system that works like that.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. That the incumbency advantage is just so strong, and of course, with all the incentives that are there to keep you there in D.C. and more interested in your own self-perpetuation than responding to people at home. It's quite a dangerous trap, even for people that have the best of intentions going in. The system sort of swallows you up. What's something that you would love to see that happens sort of as a result of term limits being placed on Congress?
If we were to implement term limits, I think it would bring us back as close as we possibly can be to real citizens legislation, which is what the founders intended all along, not what we've developed and built and ended up with over the last 244 years. Members of Congress join the political world for many very different reasons. But as they're in Congress, the longer and longer they're there, the most commonly held opinion, in my experience, is that they're really only interested in their careers and not so much in the country anymore. Because, money and the power buy the reelection for the incumbents. It's an almost impossible advantage to overcome. And if you kind of look at the numbers again, in the last 100 years, there's been only 3 incumbent presidents that failed to be reelected: Herbert Hoover, Jimmy Carter, and George Bush. Now, if you look at the numbers that we've got on Congress, and I'm using the 2014 numbers because they're the most readily available. Back in 2014, Congress had an approval rating of approximately 11%. Now, in 2014, 96.4% were reelected. It goes back to the age-old problem of the constituents look at this and say, well, you know, a lot of members of Congress aren't doing their job. They're not what we want. They're not what we need. But my guy's good because I know him, or I know his staffer, or I'm friends with somebody who's friends with him. He's been a good guy or a good representative for us, male or female, it doesn't matter. They're very good at getting in office and staying in office. I'm not so sure they're very good at doing what the constituents actually need. So incumbency is just an impossible obstacle to overcome when people try and get into politics. And I'd like to see a government comprised of people at the national level that actually want to do the right thing for the right reasons. And people will disagree with them. That's what our system's all about.
Mm-hmm.
But not to just stay in power and to amass additional power and wealth. They're there for good reasons and to do the right thing for the people.
Right. Yeah, you bring up a fine point, you know, that it's occasionally objected, well, you know, so-and-so has done a really good job in Congress. Why do you want to get rid of him? You know, and the responses are like, well, you know, that may be valid and true, but because we're operating under a system where the rules are, there are no term limits. So when you change the rule, it applies across the board. And then that changes, right? Because then, you know, we have a situation where because of the playing field's leveled, you don't have to be tempted to, you know, to rely so heavily upon one individual or two individuals to stand up for you, because all seats are going to be eventually vacated at a regular basis, right? And it gives us more opportunity for what the founders called rotation of office. You mentioned earlier, you know, you've done various roles of public service yourself, and you move from different roles, and, you know, kept things kind of fresh. So the same thing should apply to Congress, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
And I also think Congress gets involved in the United States government at levels that are unnecessary. And I'll use an example from my own life. In the Department of Defense, all field grade officer promotions go through all members of Congress's office for approval before the Department of Defense approves them. So I've served a couple times in the Pentagon. We have rules and policies and procedures on how to deal with congressmen, their staffers, their requests. They're actually thick enough to hurt somebody if they fell on you. So why should members of Congress have the ability to blackball, essentially, an officer, somebody who's worked long and hard, wore the uniform of their country, put their life on their line, but they've somehow been caught afoul of politics on the Hill. And it happens a lot to a lot of officers. You're told you're given a mission, and your attempt to carry out that mission, you have to deal with different congressional staffers. Invariably, they both are of differing opinions, and you're caught in the middle. The staffers have one overriding priority. That's to get their member reelected. Yeah. And so to make sure that that member gets exactly what they need or want to take things home to their constituency. And then, so you anger a staffer, I should say. Another couple of years, you're up for promotion. You pass through the promotion board, which is not an inconsequential occurrence in and of itself. You go into and the Secretariat actually does this. The Secretariat fields the list to all the members of Congress. They blackball you because you've angered them sometime in the past. That's something I really find despicable about our system. And I'm sure there's other examples like that in the other large agencies of the government where congressional staffers get into picking winners and losers amongst the staffs of the other agencies. I don't really think the founding fathers thought that Congress should be put into a position where they can pick and choose winners among the government.
Excellent. Yeah, Chris, you know, you make a lot of very strong points and bring some statistics to bear on this whole issue, and that's just fantastic to hear that, and there are real reasons, and most people on the very common sense level see that this is an issue that should be pushed. You know, it's 84% of Kentuckians that want term limits on Congress. It's
Yes.
pretty obvious that if you undercut a person's ability to have indefinite length of term and indefinite power, then you are naturally undercutting power structures in D.C., which was what needs to happen. So we just very much appreciate folks like yourself, Chris, who have signed our pledge, because it's going to take the state legislatures to get this done. The Congress is just not going to listen to the will of the people and term limit themselves. There's too much in it for themselves, too much of a gravy train that's rolling. They're just not going to do it. So we need help from the outside, and it's going to be the people with the help of their state legislatures getting this done. So, Chris, we want to thank you for signing that pledge and for taking time with us today.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yes, sir. Bye.